Well, you know what they say. With great channels comes great responsibility. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me using my broken voice to talk about something I wanted to talk about for a while. And this is a reply to a video that Johan over at Library of a Viking made a while ago and called Why You Shouldn't Trust Booktubers. And I'll link it down below and you should definitely go and watch it. This is sort of a reply continuation of stuff that he said there. This is not a takedown or anything of the sorts. This is like, I haven't agreed with Johan this much since his Malazan coverage. That's a joke. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile doing that. I just have thoughts that I've been playing around with for a while, and I think it might be worth for us as Booktube communities and so forth to talk about this some more and figure out where we stand, because I think we have sort of ignored a lot of aspects of content creation for a long time, because we're a really small community with like mostly relatively small channels, and we can get away with a lot of stuff that other parts of especially YouTube can't get away with or haven't gotten away with for a long time and have had these conversations. So this is sort of me going through a bunch of these things, trying to explain why I think, yeah, you should be able to trust you Booktubers, and for that we may have to do some work and talk about some things. So that's what we'll do here today. Let's get started. All right, let's begin with an important information here, or like the first big part here, and that is what I'm talking about is basically a sliding scale of channel size. Because the great thing about YouTube and social media in general is that it gives a lot of people voices that did not have voices when we only had, say, printed magazines and stuff like that, where you had to have, like, you know, pass all kinds of gatekeepers before you could even voice your opinions. With social media, that is no longer the case, and that is brilliant. That's the democratizing force of, you know, social media and the internet that we had before, you know, capitalism kind of fucked it up, but let's not talk about that today. So, in the beginning, this is really good. Everyone can start and doing these things, and this is where stuff kinda, I feel, gets more difficult. There is a sliding scale. If you have a channel, if I have a channel that has, like, I don't know, 20 subscribers and my viewed videos got like 5 views, I can do basically whatever I want within, you know, the frames of human decency, like, you know, and the TOS of YouTube, of course. So that's pretty easy. However, the more, you know, my channel grows, the more my audience grows, the more I need to be aware of certain aspects of what I'm doing here, because I'm no longer just someone talking to his 5 friends. I'm suddenly someone talking to, in my case, right now, depending on the video, like 100 or even more people per video, but in theory, something like 1,300, almost 1,400 subscribers. That's a lot of people. There are, however, obviously channels out there that are even bigger. Like on the high end, we have like people with like over 500,000 subscribers. That's like the reach that some like city newspapers have at this point, right? So responsibilities change over time, and this, I think, is the first part that we sort of need to talk about more. So what I'm going to say here is not something to keep people from starting Booktube channels. I'm just saying, like, once our channels grow, we need to sort of think about that. On the one hand, obviously, we want to improve our production values, have better cameras, better gear, get professional editing, or get better at editing ourselves. All of these things are obviously important. But there's another side, and that's the content side, where we also need to sort of be aware of responsibilities that come just with, you know, having a larger audience, a larger group of people talking to us. And I think that's the first part that I wanted to set in the beginning here. This is something we as a community need to talk about, what we kind of expect from channels of certain sizes. Like, where do we start doing this? Especially once we have channels that make money. They don't make a lot of money, don't get me wrong. Johan has another video on that as well, and I encourage you to watch that as well. But as soon as we get, say, AdSense money, as soon as we get money through Patreon, there are responsibilities, because it may not be a full-time job, but it's certainly, there are incentives to our behavior, and we need to be aware of those as well. So, yeah, this is sort of about when do we expect what and so forth. That's sort of like where I want to go with this. So let me continue with the next part here that I have titled, You Have to Be Realistic About These Things. That's a joke. No, that's a quotation. Anyway, my point is that we often talk about how we present ourselves on Booktube. The point here is anyone on social media produces something that is authenticity, but if we produce it, we produce, like, well, the verisimilitude of authenticity. We want to come across as, like, super cool people that, you know, just talk to their friends about their nerdy hobby. And that's usually how most of us start out, I assume. The problem is, however, that doesn't always stay that way. Someone who has 500,000 subscribers is no longer just talking to their 5 friends about the book that they've just read and how awesome it is. They have much more weight to throw around. And I think for reasons that maybe that at least in, like, you know, the more epic fantasy side of things, a lot of us are slightly older than, say, Gen Z or whatever. Not Johan, but a lot of us here out there, like, on the field, like, you know, people like AP, people like Philip Chase, people like Mike's Book Reviews, people like, well, me, of course. We didn't grow up with social media in the way that younger people have grown up with, and we kind of sometimes miss the effects that social media does have because of that reason. And I think partly we need to assess those. That's the next part of this. We have to be realistic that at a certain point, we are no longer just talking to 5 friends about our hobbies. We are doing more than that. And there's responsibilities that come with that more. So let's move from there to the next thing that I feel we don't talk about enough in our part of Booktube that has been a big deal in other parts of YouTube, but we have kind of kept away from this for, once again, I think, largely age reasons and our very specific form of topic, or like that we talk about, which is books. Which, I mean, it's mostly us in the more like epic fantasy, adult-oriented fantasy sphere, science fiction sphere, a part of, like, Booktube. Other parts of Booktube have obviously talked about this for a long time. So, let's talk about the next topic here, parasociality. I know it's hard to understand this. It's one of those concepts that is relatively new. It's been thrown around a lot on YouTube, but not in our community. So, to break it down really shortly, parasociality or parasocial relationships or parasocial experiences are when we feel that we have a connection to the person on the other side of the screen, and that is a one-dimensional connection and not two-directional, but we feel as if it were a two-dimensional connection. And the problem is, we all make those connections. Social media has made this incredibly easy. It was there before. It's a terminology that comes from, like, psychology, talking about television in the 1950s. But it's real, and it's something we can't actually avoid as creators, right? Obviously, once again, if we have like 20 subscribers and 10 of those are my family and friends, then yeah, that's not parasociality. I would be, as a creator, able to answer every comment, to talk to every person as much as I want, because that's just something that I can do. Once I reach 1,000 subscribers, that's probably no longer the case. And so forth. The problem is, however, that we can't control what those subscribers feel about us, how they feel we are, and that is something we need to be aware of. It's something that can become important if you are like a big YouTuber with, like, say, over 100,000 subscribers. Because statistically, there will be a lot of people in there that have, like, all their own backgrounds and so forth, and it can lead to, like, how do we interact when people send us direct messages, when people become friends with us on Discord or other ways, and try to interact with us, and maybe have motives that we need to be wary of, that could, you know, sometimes in parasociality verge to the romantic, and then we have, like, power differences and stuff that we don't want to get into today, but those are things we need to be aware of, and we haven't thought about this or talked about this in the larger Booktube sphere, whereas other parts of YouTube have done so before. There's a second part here that I don't want to talk about too much here, which is Patreon, stuff like that. People that have parasocial attachments to us as content creators are more willing to give us money. It's how the model of Patreon really works. It's why, you know, Patreons that offer book clubs, direct chats with content creators and so forth are successful up to a point. That doesn't mean we should not do these things, but we need to be careful of what we're offering and what we think or what we believe the people giving us money on Patreon are actually expecting from us in that regard. Just, once again, I'm throwing out things that I think we need to talk about more. So that's one part here. The next step is transparency. What do I mean by transparency? See, There's one thing you've probably noticed. It's on, well, out there on book, some parts of the book community, sometimes on Goodreads, people claim that, well, I was given an arc for this book in return for a honest review. And that's exactly what I mean with transparency. Sometimes we talk about stuff where we had an incentive to talk about. Someone gave us a book for free. Someone possibly even paid us to talk about something. Say, if you have something like a fantasy news or science fiction fantasy spotlight or something like that, and you do a cover reveal. Now, I'm not saying people get paid for this because I don't know. But once you reach the, 200, 300, 500,000 subscriber level, revealing a cover for even a big publisher book on your channel in whatever form is an investment for those publishers, and there are incentives out there. And if we do these kind of things, we need to be aware of that, and we should be communicating these things clearly. Go like, well, I got this book for free. Now, normally that doesn't mean anything, but if we run this as a business, which some of us are doing after a certain level because it's just too much work at that point. Yeah, there are consequences. Say, if I, part of my business model is to have reviews, spoiler-free reviews and cover reveals and so forth for upcoming big titles, big authors and so forth, I know those videos will do well. That will give me more money and so forth. So, even if no one says anything explicitly, me giving a bad review to a book could have the consequence that said publisher will be, picking a different YouTuber to do their cover reveal next time, and that will hurt me financially. Now, that's something that is not happening necessarily in Booktube. I don't know, because I'm too small for that. It's something I've certainly experienced when writing music reviews, and I know there's other parts where this is, once again, it happens. And even if there are no explicit sort of deals of that sort or threats, there is a tendency to start self-censoring in these situations. And we need to be aware of that. And being transparent, going well, I got paid for this. I got this in return for, and so forth. Putting these things in, say, video descriptions and so forth are a way for us to communicate this and, telling our audience, where we got the things that we talk about. That's an important aspect. We'll come back to that later on when I talk about citing of sources, but I think it's important to always be transparent about these things. I feel like a really good example for this is recently, earlier this year, Daniel Green made, in part of his fantasy news, he decided to not put in information about a book, that being, I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons by Peter S. Beagle, because there's this whole hullabaloo about legal rights and so forth. And then he did some more stuff, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then he made a second video apologizing, explaining the situation and so forth. That is what I mean with transparency, because once you start doing fantasy news, you're not just telling people about your favorite books, you are providing information, you are providing services that, are journalistic up to a point. And with journalism, there's standards that come with that, whether you want to or not. It's kind of the sort of the problem there. We can argue why it's kind of fucked up that it's YouTubers having to provide these services and no longer, done by actual, professional journalists, but this is the situation we live in. I have views on why we are there, but they don't fit in here. The point is, the larger our channel, the more we are providing services that go beyond just, hey, look, this guy that I likes this book, so I guess I might also like this book. We start providing news, we start providing information, and with that comes responsibility. Even if we don't want to call ourselves journalists, we are fulfilling some of these roles, which sucks. And this leads me to the next part, of course, which is due diligence. There's a large scale of these kind of things, right? When we read a book, framing our reviews hey, this is this author, they did this or that. If they have something bad, we'll not talk about it today. I'll have a second sort of follow-up video when we talk about Neil Gaiman and other problematic authors. Today, I just want to talk about the idea of doing due diligence. Figuring out whether it's the first book in a series or a standalone, which some magazines out there apparently don't do. As I recently realized when I read a review for Navola by Paolo Bacigalupi on the Grimdark magazine, where people talked about it has a weird ending for a standalone. It's yeah, because it's not a standalone, right? So making sure we get our facts straight when we talk about parts or criticizing aspects of a book that are, wouldn't be worth criticizing if they are not, that part of a book, right? Doing these kind of things, that's due diligence, checking what we're talking about, checking about all the other stuff out there. Once again, the larger our channel, the more we need to do this kind of due diligence. Because once again, if I'm just talking to friends about like a book I just like, the impact is very small. But once I am, talking to 1,000, 100,000, or whatever people, we are starting to provide active services to the publishing industry, even, if it's just like self-publishing publishing authors. We are providing service. We are selling books. We are doing sometimes unpaid, sometimes paid advertisement, whether we want to call it that or not, because people buy books because we talk about it. So we have to do our due diligence up to some level. Once again, the level we need to do this at is... grows the larger our channel grow, and at some point we might even have to, once we run this like a business, we might have to pay someone to help us with research and stuff like that. That's just something that we do at that point, because we are moving from being just fans talking about something. We are closer, moving closer to being basically journalists, whether we want to call it that or not. So this is what I said, due diligence. Yeah, let's move on with communication. Now, this is sort of similar to transparency. I think there are some differences, which is why I put it in like its own category. And that means just like how we talk about stuff, how we explain our reasonings, how we define terminology, how we explain what we're doing, right? It's like, if we do a review, is this me telling you why I really love this book? Is this me providing some form of deeper analysis? Is this, these things, being upfront with these kind of things can make it easier for people to trust us. At the end of the day, a large part will just be, how nice do people think we are? How much do people vibe with our, approach? But one part is to make sure that people know where they're standing with us and not just go like, well, I like this guy, so I'll trust them, whatever they say. We need to be clear in our communication what we do. When we do like a, book haul, make sure that we talk about like where we got the books from. When we do like tier lists, explain our framing. Communicating the framework of videos, I think, is an important part. And that could also mean, putting stuff down in like descriptions, video descriptions, pinned comments and so forth to give those like additional information that doesn't make it quite into the video. That's another thing we need to sort of figure out depending on what we're doing, depending on which level we're at, which leads me to the last part, which is of course citing of sources. Now, obviously, if we just do a spoiler-free review of a book that we've just picked up, there's very little sources to cite, except for the book, possibly. Some of us do go deeper. Sometimes we do deep dives, somewhere to do like larger explanatory videos, stuff like that. And some of us go and do like full-on literary theory books, videos and stuff like that. And at that point, it's just, good practice to provide at least like bibliography and go like, hey, like, this is what I read for this. If you've read something else, I don't know, you can tell me that I missed out on a big deal or whatever, but being professional on that level, once again, something that we might start looking at, depending on what we're doing and depending to which kind of audience we're doing it. Are we just talking to like 5 blokes in the pub, or are we talking to like 100,000 people and making claims? Because at some point we don't just make claims that go like, well, I like this really much. We're making pseudo-objective claims here. They're not fully objective, but we're making claims that have sort of like larger reach. And for that, we need to figure out what stuff do we need to cite when we make videos. And I don't have the answers for any of these questions. I just think these are important aspects, because if we have some sort of clarity about sort of what we expect from booktubers at that point, and I would argue that yes, if you run like a 500,000+ viewer channel, you have responsibilities that go beyond going, well, I don't have responsibilities, I'm just a bloke talking about books, because you are not. You are providing services that go far beyond that. And, other magazines, online magazines, printed magazines, journalistic outputs do have these standards to apply to. And we need to be aware of the fact that we slide into that field the larger our channels grow. So yeah, these are just a few things that I think we need to talk about, because at that point, I feel you should be able to trust booktubers, and we need to figure out ways to make you be able to trust. We need to figure out ways to communicate why you should be able to trust us. I would love to have, you know, feedback from other booktubers, from viewers. What do you sort of expect from booktubers? What kind of information do you get from booktubers? Have you ever thought about like where they get their information from? That kind of stuff. At what point would you start no longer trusting a booktuber when they tell you something? Talk about it in the comments if you're a booktuber. Chime in, make another video, yell at me, do the things. We need to talk about this because our community is growing, channels are growing, people are trusting us whether we want to or not, and that means we kind of need to get our shit together. So yeah, that's that. I hope you enjoyed this, at least at some point. Like, subscribe, comment. If you like me, if you start building parasocial relationships towards me, please do all of these things. If you want to give me money, no, sorry. Anyway, there's links down there if you want to support me, but like mostly just like, subscribe, comment, make angry videos at me because I think we need to talk about this. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one when I talk about, I don't know, something else. Until then, thanks and cheers.